the US Navy boasts an $800 billion defense budget, more than the combined budgets of the next 10 nations. They possess aircraft carriers dubbed 4.5 acres of mobile American territory, and Ohio-class nuclear submarines capable of wiping out hundreds of cities with a single button press. But right now, in the narrow and murky Strait of Hormuz, this entire colossal war machine is locked down by something a mere 29 meters long. It's 16 Iranian mini-submarines lying silently at the bottom of the sea. Their engines are off. They're invisible to sonar. They've turned the shallow 30-meter waters into a labyrinth of traps that America's trillion-dollar monsters cannot enter. The US Navy doesn't lack weapons. They lack a way to find the enemy right at their feet. With each passing second, a single question gnaws at Pentagon commanders. What will happen if we advance and the waters aren't empty? When absolute power is stifled by geography, what will the superpower do to escape? To understand why Washington is so worried, we need to look directly at the main character lurking at the bottom of the ocean, the Ghadir-class submarine. Don't let its size fool you. At just 29 meters long, less than the length of 2 flatbed buses, the Ghadir looks outdated, even cheap, compared to an Arleigh Burke-class super submarine. But in this environment, that cheapness and smallness are a shrewd strategic choice. The Ghadir wasn't built to be a technological marvel. It was built to be a shallow water ghost. Most American anti-submarine warfare systems are optimized to search for massive, heat, and noise-emitting steel monsters in the deep ocean. But the Ghadir, it uses an extremely simple diesel-electric propulsion system. When it shuts down and rests on the continental shelf, it makes no noise, emits no significant heat, and its sonar cross-section is so small that American automated systems easily classify it as a rock or a coral reef. Many independent military experts estimate that Iran possesses around 16 to 20 of these vessels on active duty. They don't need to be the most modern, they just need to be in the right place. Imagine the Ghadir as a sniper, lying motionless in dense bushes. It doesn't need thick armor, it doesn't need heavy firepower, it only needs patience and invisibility. From the shadows of the seabed, a Ghadir can launch heavy 533mm torpedoes, or JASC, 2 cruise missiles, capable of neutralizing any American warship that dares to enter its sights. This creates a deadly paradox. The US Navy isn't afraid of what they see on radar. They're afraid of what they know is there, but can't find. These 16 submarines aren't just weapons. They're 16 bottlenecks, tightening the noose around the confidence of the world's most powerful fleet. The smallest thing is actually holding back the biggest machine. But why can't a technological superpower like the US solve such a tiny problem? The answer doesn't lie in the submarine itself, but in where it stands. There's a classic military saying, tactics are for amateurs, geography is for masters. In the Strait of Hormuz, geography isn't just the context, it's a combatant, and it's on Iran's side. Look at the map. The narrowest point of the strait is only about 54 kilometers wide, but in reality, the safe navigation channel for massive cargo ships is a mere 3 kilometers wide. Imagine the entire global energy economy having to squeeze through such a narrow gap every day. Even more important is the depth. The average depth here is only about 30 meters. To put it into perspective, a US Ohio-class submarine needs at least 20 to 30 meters of water from the top of its conning tower to operate safely. In Hormuz, if a US submarine tried to dive, it would almost certainly be belly to the mud, back to the waves. The US is not weakened. But their trillion-dollar steel monsters are designed to dominate the deep oceans, where they have the space to maneuver, hide, and hunt. When forced into a shallow pool, like the Hormuz, that power is distorted. The world's most advanced sonar sensors, sensitive enough to hear fish swimming in the open ocean, become blind here. Why? Because the Hormuz is one of the noisiest waters on the planet. The engines of hundreds of oil tankers, merchant ships, and fishing boats create a massive sound wall. With a tiny Ghadir lying still at the bottom, this noise is the perfect camouflage. It's like trying to hear a pin drop in the middle of a loud rock concert. This is the crucial point. Iran doesn't need to become stronger than the US. They just need to choose a battlefield where US dominance is stripped away. The US remains a superpower, but at Hormuz, its geographical advantage has stripped it of its power and handed it over to 16 mini-submarines, patiently waiting. If Hormuz is where the advantage is distorted, then specifically, what thorny problems are America's most expensive weapons facing? The US Navy is built on a single philosophy: absolute dominance. Their power is optimized for major battles in the Pacific or Atlantic areas, with endless maneuverability and depths of thousands of meters. In that environment, the American sensor network is most effective because the enemy is isolated from acoustic interference. If a Russian submarine appears in the middle of the Atlantic, it's like a single bright spot on a black screen. But in Hormuz, all those advantages suddenly become a burden. The first problem is the disparity in scale. The US Virginia-class or Los Angeles-class attack submarines are technological marvels, but they are too big. Imagine driving in 1/8 wheel truck into a narrow, potholed alleyway. You have the most powerful engine, but you can't turn, you can't accelerate, and you're constantly worried about hitting a reef. Meanwhile, the towed array sonar system, America's most sensitive eyes and ears, typically has cable lengths of several kilometers. In a narrow strait like the Hormuz, deploying this equipment is like trying to drop a long fishing line across a lake full of algae and passing ships. It's not only useless, but also at risk of breaking or being damaged by commercial vessels. The second problem is the cost-effectiveness ratio. This is the point that strategists at the Pentagon are most concerned about. To hunt down a Ghadir worth several $1,000,000, the US has to deploy P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft, MH-60R helicopters, and Aegis destroyers. Each hour of operating these assets costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. The US doesn't lack weapons, but they lack the right dose of power. Using a $1 million missile defense system to monitor an old, wooden, and steel mini-submarine is a terrible waste of resources. Iran understands this. They don't need to destroy the American fleet. They just need to force the US to maintain a state of extreme vigilance at an unsustainable political and economic cost. It's not about who can shoot harder. It's about applying the right kind of power to the right environment. When a superpower is forced to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut in an environment where the nut is invisible, the one wielding the sledgehammer is the one in danger. But if Ghadir isn't used in a direct confrontation, what does Iran really want? The answer lies in a tactic even more sophisticated than sinking a ship, the tactic of creating uncertainty. In traditional military thinking, victory means sinking enemy ships and mastering the seas. But at Hormuz, Iran is writing a different definition. The Ghadir submarines weren't sent for a suicide attack on a US carrier strike group. Their mission is far more sophisticated: to turn presence into doubt. Put yourself in the shoes of a fleet commander or a giant oil tanker captain. You know there are 16 submarines out there. You don't know where they are. You don't know if they've laid mines or which areas are safe. In naval warfare, not knowing is the most lethal weapon. Just one unconfirmed report of an underwater object could instantly shut down an entire 3-kilometer shipping lane. Iran doesn't need to fire, they just need to make the enemy think they can fire at any moment. This uncertainty creates a devastating domino effect. For the military, the US is forced to maintain a 24/7 state of heightened alert. Anti-submarine helicopters must fly continuously, and sonar systems must scan non-stop. Psychological fatigue and equipment depletion are the exorbitant price the US pays for an enemy that hasn't even appeared yet. For the economy, marine insurance companies like Lloyd's of London don't care how many aircraft carriers the US has. They care about risk. As long as Ghadir remains missing at the bottom of the sea, insurance premiums will remain sky high, making the transport of oil through the Hormuz an economically unprofitable undertaking. This is the fatal weakness of a superpower. The stronger and more expensive the US becomes, the more it has to lose. Meanwhile, 16 mini-submarines, inexpensive and replaceable platforms, hold the initiative. They don't need to win a major naval battle to change the course of the world. They just need to keep the world in suspense about everything. The US is in an endless hunt, where the smaller the adversary, the greater the cost of finding them. But there's a secret more terrifying than the torpedoes Ghadir carries. What's really keeping the Pentagon awake at night isn't what this submarine can do right now, but what it can leave behind. In modern warfare, sometimes the winner isn't the one who shoots down the most targets, but the one who cripples the opponent before they can claim victory. In the Strait of Hormuz, the US isn't just facing submarines or mines, they're facing a mathematical nightmare, the cost proportion paradox. Let's look at the real numbers. A Ghadir-class mini-submarine is relatively inexpensive to build, using technologies that Iran could easily develop domestically. Yet, to counter it, the US Navy is mobilizing the most expensive resources in its arsenal. Each hour of flight for a P-8 Poseidon anti-submarine aircraft costs approximately $35,000. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a day just to maintain combat readiness. And let's not forget, to protect a single oil tanker passing through the strait, the US needs an entire escort ecosystem from the air, surface, and underwater. This is the financial trap that Tehran has set. Iran doesn't need to sink an aircraft carrier to gain an advantage. They only need to maintain a state of economic war of attrition. They are forcing the US to use expensive silver bullets to shoot at cheap ghosts. The strength of a superpower lies not in how much money they have, but in how long they can sustain that spending before domestic public opinion and the economy begin to crack. And that is why the real impact of those 16 mini-submarines doesn't stay at the bottom of the Sea of Hormuz. It's spreading to stock markets and gas stations thousands of miles away. At this point, it seems Iran has the upper hand in the game of go at Hormuz. But the reality is far more complex. In military affairs, no weapon is omnipotent, and Tehran's strategy is also revealing fatal flaws. Remember, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a passageway for the world. It is Iran's only lifeline. The first limitation is self-vulnerability. Iran exports oil to sustain its economy, which is already fractured under the pressure of prolonged sanctions. If they use 16 Ghadir submarines to completely blockade the strait with mines, they are essentially putting a noose around their own neck. Once Hormuz is closed, Tehran's source of foreign exchange will disappear. Iran cannot sustain instability indefinitely without collapsing its domestic financial system. The second limitation lies in the nature of the mini-submarine. The Ghadir is a formidable ambush killer, but it is not a resilient warrior. With its small size, it could only carry a maximum of 2 torpedoes and a limited number of mines. Its mission endurance was very low. The crew faced extreme fatigue in cramped space, lack of oxygen, and poor sanitary conditions. Once detected or forced to reveal itself, the Ghadir was almost defenseless against the firepower of American helicopters or escort ships. Furthermore, the uncertainty tactic is a double-edged sword. Uncertainty might deter the oil tanker for weeks, but it also spurred the US and its allies to seek longer-term alternatives, from pipelines across the desert to a push for renewable energy. Iran may have won tactically at Hormuz today, but it is risking being sidelined from the future energy map. The uncertainty that the Ghadir created was extremely effective in the short term, but it cannot translate into a sustainable, unlimited advantage without a political solution. It's time we face the harshest truth of this crisis. What the Pentagon fears most isn't the prospect of the US Navy being defeated by Iran. No sane person would believe that 16 mini-submarines could wipe out the most powerful fleet in human history. The real fear lies in this. America is still powerful, but it is no longer free. The confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz was not just a new chapter in military history. It was a wake-up call about the nature of power in the 21st century. We often judge power by numbers, trillion-dollar defense budgets, the number of aircraft carriers, or the sophistication of sonar algorithms. But Hormuz taught us a different lesson. True power is not simply about having a larger budget. True power is the sum of four elements: the right tools, the right environment, the right cost-effectiveness ratio, and the ability to sustain it. In these waters, Iran's 16 mini-submarines didn't need to defeat the US Navy in the classical sense of the word. They didn't need to initiate a major war to gain glory. Their mission was simpler, yet far more devastating: to transform a narrow body of water into a place where every superpower decision becomes slower, more expensive, riskier, and more uncertain than ever before. This is the greatest paradox of modern warfare. Sometimes, what cripples a superpower's freedom of action isn't the biggest weapon or the most formidable enemy. It's the smallest, cheapest platform, but one that's perfectly positioned. When a 2.9-meter long object can bring an $800 billion system to a standstill, we understand that the world order is shifting. Power is no longer the exclusive domain of those with bottomless pockets, but belongs to those who understand the terrain and know how to turn asymmetry into an art of blockade. Hormuz is still there. The 16 ghosts are still there. And the world will have to come to terms with a new reality. In a confined space, the small hold the keys to the big doors.